Good day, I am Naomi Verana and I am assigned to report about timer in Windows form. First, let me define a timer. Number one, it is used for time intervals. Number two, it repeatedly runs a block of code at specific intervals. And to make it easier for us to understand, let us relate this to our previous topics. We have tackled about different types of looping, and what's common among them is that in order to execute the code inside the loop, the condition must be satisfied. And as long as the condition is satisfied or true, it will continue to execute repeatedly. And we can apply the same principle here in timer, but the difference is that we do not have a condition to satisfy. We only have an interval for how long it will take for the code to execute again after a previous execution. We will further discuss that later on, so let us now proceed with number three. It has no visual representation and works as a component in the background. Unlike other form controls from the toolbox like the text box, the label, the button, they can be modified through the codes in source and still be visible in the actual application. But as for the timer, it is just part of the process of getting the values to display in the application. Now, let's learn how to access the timer. Like any other form control, we have to go to the design option, which is in the lower left, then navigate to view, then tools. The third step is to click on the Windows form. Fourth is to go to the timer. And in the list of the Windows form, you'll find the timer at the very bottom of the list. The next step is to drag and drop it onto the form. Then for step number 6, click timer 1 and go to properties. And the picture on the left should appear on the upper right of your screen. And to understand it better, let me show you an actual demonstration. Go to the design option and click the Windows form. Double click the timer and start dragging it into the main form. Once you have successfully accessed the timer, you will see something like this on the lower left. Then on the upper right, you will see the properties. So let's now talk about its properties. Let us discuss first the name. It is simply the name of the timer, and we name it the same way we name the text boxes, the labels, and it is important to name it so we know what to write on our codes later. And as you can see within the behavior section, we can see enabled and interval. And as for the enabled, according to our definition, it is false by default, which can be set as true or false. And it indicates whether the timer will begin once your application starts or not. If it is set to true, the timer will begin once the application starts. However, if it is set to false, the timer will not start unless we use the method start, which we will also discuss later. And next is the interval. This is the time before the tick event is raised relative to the last occurrence of the tick event. The tick event is simply the code executed once the interval elapses. For example, you want to execute a specific block of code every 1 second. You will have to set the interval as 1000 since it is in milliseconds. And once 1000 milliseconds have passed, the code inside the tick event will execute. And speaking of the tick event, let's now focus on the timer tick event. This event handler will be executed every time the specified interval is reached. Now that we have a timer already, I will show you how to access the tick event. Click this icon and you will see the tick event. Double click the tick event and it will redirect you to the source code. Now under the timer 1 tick, you can now write your code which will be executed every time the tick event was raised. Lastly, I'll present two useful methods in timer, the start and the stop. First one is the start method, and once this was triggered, the interval will begin. And once it elapses, the code inside the tick event will execute. Then opposite of the start is the stop method since it automatically stops the codes from executing. These two are often used through the buttons. And to further explain these things, let me have another demonstration of doing a simple stopwatch for us to be able to see how we could really apply all of the things we tackled earlier. I have here a preset design of a simple stopwatch with millisecond, second, minute, and hour. So again, let us get the timer from the tools, double click it and drag it to the form. Rename the timer. Then let the enable be set as false since we don't want the stopwatch to start right away when we run it because we will be using a start button. Now we will set the interval into 1 since we want to execute the code inside the tick event every 1 millisecond. Then let's get the timer tick event from the lightning icon. Double click the tick and it will redirect us to the source code. Then we can now write our codes inside the tick event which will be executed every 1 millisecond. After writing the code in the tick event, we can now implement the start method. Simply double click the start button and write the name of the timer, that start, open and close parentheses inside the event handler. Just repeat the same process for the stop method. Then for the reset, double click the button from the design and use the stop method, then change the values to 0 and set the label with the default start. Let us now check if the application is working. And there you have it, our simple stopwatch using timer form control in Windows Form.